Founding a dynasty is one thing. Ensuring it can stand the test of time is another. In only 16 years, Zhu Yuanzhang, an orphaned illiterate peasant, rose from a rebel soldier to become the Hongwu emperor. But to ensure that his great Ming dynasty would last, the emperor would eventually purge even his most loyal friends. This is the story of the harsh reign of Hongwu. January 1368. The Ming dynasty, just established, is still dwarfed by the about to collapse Mongol Yuan dynasty from which it has emerged. The Hongwu emperor will reunite all of China under a Han realm for the first time in over 400 years. Before the turn of the year, his army will overthrow the Yuan. The Ming's most illustrious generals, Xu Da and Chang Yuchun, spearheading the northern expedition against the Yuan dynasty, could not simply march on the capital of Hanbalik directly. Their first objective was to secure the border by conquering all territory from the Shandong Peninsula to the Tong Mountain Pass. From the recently conquered Yunnan, Chang Yuchun marched on Dongchang in March, as Xu Da captured Le'an 2 weeks later. Soon, Hongwu's forces had conquered the Shandong Peninsula. Having seized the east, the Ming war machine would then sweep west. The city of Bianyang was captured on April 16th. Concluding the campaign, the strategic Tong Mountain Pass was secured on May 13th. The Ming armies could now set their eyes on the capital city of the Yuan dynasty. To prepare for this decisive expedition, the emperor himself travelled to Bianyang, arriving on June 9th. Alongside his brothers-in-arms Xu Da and Chang Yuchun, the three men would spend most of summer discussing strategies to plan out the upcoming campaign. In the meantime, several Ming armies had also been busy conquering the south, which was still technically under Yuan control. On land, General Hu Weiyong would march on Yuan garrisons, as Admirals Tang He and Liao Yongzhong sailed down the coast. On the 17th of February, Tang He went inland from the recently conquered Fuzhou and took Yanping. The admiral captured not only the city, but enemy General Chen Youding as well, the local champion of the Yuan dynasty, who was brought to the capital of Yingtian. Ever loyal to the Yuan, Chen Youding refused to switch sides to the end and was executed. Neighbouring counties would surrender to Tang He thereafter. In parallel, Hu Weiyong had captured Dingzhou and its surroundings, completing the conquest of present-day Fujian. When the Ming Navy, sailing further south, reached Guangzhou in mid-April, local Yuan general He Zhen surrendered, perhaps aware of the fate of his colleague. Following this victory, the Ming armies could then secure the city's surroundings, marching from the north on Yingde, Qingyuan, and Zhaoqing, completing the conquest of Guangdong. In a last campaign, the invading forces sailed up the Xi River, taking Wuzhou in late May. The conquest of Guangxi would soon be completed, as land forces marched further west until they captured Xiangzhou on the 20th of July. Thus, by midsummer, the south was under Ming rule. Back in Bianyang, the northern expedition's plans were settled. As a colossal army was assembled, the Hongwu emperor changed the city's name to Kaifang, its previous name during the Song dynasty. More significantly, he would also rename the capital of Yingtian to Nanjing, southern capital, the name it has today. On the 15th of August, the forces of Xu Da and Chang Yuchun were back on the march. 3 days into the campaign, Zhangde was taken, followed by Handan 3 days later. Chang took Dezhou on the 27th. By September, the Ming troops entered the metropolitan area. As the Yuan dynasty's demise became inevitable, its emperor Togon Tamar and his court fled beyond the Great Wall to Shangdu, the secondary capital. Khan Balik was left in the hands of Tamur Bukha, Prince of Huai, a grandson of Kublai Khan. But the garrison did not stand a chance against the huge Ming armies. Once the seat of the whole Mongol Empire, Khan Balik was taken on the 20th of September. Its imposing imperial palaces were immediately burnt to the ground. Symbolically, the city was renamed Beiping, pacified north. Only 34 years later, Wu Zhudi, the at the time 8-year-old son of Hongwu, seized the throne and baptized the city Beijing. With the Yuan's primary capital came both its prominent officials and the administrative documents of the empire. Absorbing the former into the Ming's bureaucracy, the officials were tasked with compiling the official history of the Yuan. But the metropolitan area was not pacified yet. A few Yuan garrisons remained and would have to be conquered. Chang Yuchun moved on, taking Baoding and Zhengding in November. Xu Da finished the task, marching troops from Zhengding on Zhaozhou, which fell on the 26th of December. The North China Plain was conquered, dealing a crushing blow to the Yuan's ambitions over China. But the Mongol court, still controlling immense territory, swore to reclaim Kublai Khan's legacy. The fight was far from over. The collapsing Yuan dynasty could still count on its champion, He Tamar, now based in Shanxi. He was a competent commander who had once crushed the Red Turbans. Despite the many Ming attempts to get him to defect, he would stay loyal to the Yuan until the end. Nonetheless, he was unable to hold against the Ming onslaught on the Shanxi region. Taiyuan fell in early January 1369, compelling him to retreat to Gansu. Within a few weeks, the whole region was invaded by Ming troops. Chang Yuchun completed the campaign by securing Datong in March. Shanxi was conquered. Xu Da then marched his army south, crossing the Yellow River to invade Shanxi. Fengyuan would present a difficult challenge. As a prefectural city, it was strongly defended by Yuan General Li Seqi, a Han commander who had once crushed the Red Turbans in the region. But the Ming momentum was unstoppable, and the city fell around mid-April. It would later be renamed Xi'an, its current name. After chasing Li Seqi for about a month, the Ming eventually received the surrender of the Yuan general, whose remaining force was absorbed into the Ming ranks. Remaining Yuan garrisons gave a sincere fight, but would eventually all surrender. Lanzhou was taken on the 23rd of May, Jingning in June, and Qinyang by the first days of fall. Several of these cities would actually rebel after their surrender, requiring follow-up operations, but by autumn the region was pacified. Shanxi had been taken. But from Shangdu, the Yuan imperial court could take advantage of this mobilization in the east to counterattack. Hongwu had thus ordered a new northern campaign in parallel. This task befell Chang Yuchun, who ventured beyond the Great Wall. After breaking through Yuan defenses, Chang reached Shangdu by midsummer, compelling Yuan Emperor Togon Tamar and his court to retreat further away to Yingchang. Shangdu fell on July 20th and was razed to the ground, leaving for later generations only sparse ruins of the once majestic city. Before the victorious troops could return home, the campaign's success was tainted by an anticlimactic twist of fate. At not yet 40 years old, Chang Yuchun died after a short illness on the 9th of August. The Hongwu emperor was devastated by the news, spending several days mourning this loss in seclusion. When the victorious general's body was brought back to the capital, the emperor himself waited at the city's outskirts to greet the procession. Chang would have a great state funeral, attended by not only the emperor, but Xu Da and Tang He as well, who were recalled from across the empire for the occasion. On the 10th of October, the late Ming commander was buried on Purple Mountain. Chang's death was good news for the Mongols. As the major Ming generals had been summoned away from the front lines, He Tamo rode into Shanxi in January 1370. Despite an unsuccessful siege at Lanzhou, he remained in the region, building up a counterattack. The Yuan champion had to be dealt with. For this, Xu Da, appointed by the emperor as Zhenglu Dajiangjun, Great Barbarian Subduing General, departed on the 30th of January. 3 months later, his force met the Mongol army at Dingxi. However, it was much larger than anticipated, forcing the Ming to adopt a defensive stance. In the subsequent battle, He Tamo nearly made the whole force rout. On the verge of disaster, Xu Da was able to rally his men, defeat the Mongol champion, and chase him beyond the Gobi deserts. Had he failed, the Mongols could have regained the upper hand in the region. Shanxi was saved, but the Yuan imperial court was still operating on the other side of the frontier. Its final subjugation was entrusted to Li Wenzhong, the emperor's nephew, who marched north through Zhuyong Pass to attack Yingchang. He would never capture the Yuan emperor. On the 23rd of May 1370, Togan Tamor died, ending the longest reign over the Yuan dynasty, which had also seen its collapse. The Mongols now bowed to his son, Ayushridra, but barely had the new Yuan emperor taken the reins of the dynasty when Li Wenzhong arrived. The emperor's nephew defeated the Mongols, seizing Yingchang in June. In the Mongol debacle, Ayushridra was able to escape, but his son and heir Maidarbal, possibly his wife Empress Guan, and many nobles and officials were captured. On his return, Li Wenzhong took more land and prisoners as he captured Xingzhou and Jinzhou. This northern expedition had been a great success for the Ming dynasty and the nail in the coffin for the Great Yuan, now described as Northern Yuan. Marking a return to square one for the Mongols, Ayushridra returned to Karakoram, the old capital of the Mongol Empire, without most of his court, and especially his heir. Back in Nanjing, as Hongwu had done with the son of Chen Youliang, he ennobled Maidarbal as Marquis of Chongli and granted him a lavish mansion. But the emperor's attention also turned to his own offspring. In March 1370, the Ming emperor's 10th son was born. Hongwu granted all of them princely titles, as well as the domains in the frontier regions they would administer upon reaching majority. The emperor aimed to make all princes of the blood military pillars both against external threats and internal rebellions. Little did he know how severely this would backfire after his death. Among them were his second son, Zhu Shuang, Prince of Qin, to one day govern Xi'an, third son, Zhu Gang, Prince of Jin, in Taiyuan, and fourth son, Zhu Di, Prince of Yan, in Beiping. In addition to their classical Confucian education, Hongwu also enforced military practice and civil labor in his son's upbringing. However, Zhu Biao, the emperor's first son and crown prince, was given a separate education to prepare him to one day succeed his father. Hongwu evidently realized how descendants of great founders often became weak, out of touch, or uninterested with the governance of the state. To prevent this, the emperor also began drafting the Zuoxun Lu, or Record of the Ancestors' Instructions, later known as the Ancestral Injunctions. The document consisted of 13 guidelines and warnings for his descendants. It essentially advocated strong personal discipline, respect of rituals, and constant suspicion of potential traitors. The initial version of the Zuoxun Lu would be completed after 3 years of drafting, but undergo several revisions during the next 2 decades. Efficiently growing an empire in the long term requires regularly recruiting young talents. Hongwu evidently understood the importance of promoting education. An imperial university, or Guozhejian, was founded in Nanjing in the year of the dynasty's founding. More significantly, on the 5th of June 1370, the Hongwu Emperor re-established the imperial examination. Up to now, administrative positions had been based on personal recommendation alone, much like during most of the Yuan dynasty. But once more with the ancient system of testing students on Confucian classics, reasoning and literary skills allowed talented youths to ascend the social ladder. However, true to his vastly martial era name, Hongwu ordered candidates to be tested on archery and horsemanship skills as well as intellectual capacities. That same month, aiming to further stabilize the dynasty, the emperor turned his back on the movements which had allowed him to rise up in the first place. The White Lotus sect and Manichaeism as a whole, which had inspired the Red Turban rebellions, were banned. After all, they could inspire rebellions again, only this time against the Ming. That same year, the compilation of the Yuan Shi, the official history of the Yuan dynasty, was completed after only a few months of drafting. This work would be heavily criticized as it presented numerous mistakes and would be revised both during the Qing dynasty and the Republican era. Although the Yuan dynasty was over, heaven did not stop sending its natural disasters over the empire. Severe droughts struck the nation in the summer of 1370. Embracing all duties of an emperor, Hongwu aimed to regain the favors of heaven. This time, he began fasting for several days, ordering his sons to follow his example, and even exposing himself to the hot summer sun for one whole day at an altar outside the palace. After 5 days, rain fell once more. Conquering the coastal regions of China had exposed the Ming dynasty to a new kind of problem: piracy. Pirate raids plagued the coasts of Korea, southern Shandong, and especially modern Zhejiang and Fujian. This was the work of the Wokao, or Japanese pirates, although some of them were Chinese and Korean. The Wokao were based in the south and northwest of the Japanese island of Kyushu, out of reach from the continent. To deal with this situation, the Hongwu Emperor dispatched envoys to Kyushu around 1370, demanding both the suppression of Japanese pirates and the submission of Japan as a vassal to the Ming. The mission reached the island city of Dazaihu, where Prince Kaneyoshi lived. Evidently unimpressed, the Japanese figurehead actually executed a third of the envoys and detained the rest. The Hongwu Emperor sent a more threatening message to the prince. This time, Kaneyoshi nominally accepted the requests and was granted the title of King of Japan by Hongwu. But Japan was in the midst of a civil war, and only a few months later, Kaneyoshi lost control of Kyushu and died shortly after. The Wokao pirates would remain a constant burden for the Ming dynasty thereafter. Perhaps aiming to make the coast less attractive, the Hongwu Emperor enforced the Haijin in 1371, literally sea ban. Anyone caught privately trading with foreign entities would be immediately put to death and their families banished to the frontier. This was one of Hongwu's first harsh decisions. They would get much worse. In a stark contrast to the Yuan dynasty, the Ming would be an isolationist empire. In the same spirit, Hongwu emphasized the policy of 不争之国, country without conquest. He would, for example, never consider invasions of Vietnam, Korea, Japan, and other neighboring regions. The Mongols, though, were a different matter. Despite the latest campaigns, the Mongols were still a serious threat to the Ming. The northern Yuan systematically refused Ming demands to surrender, even though its heir Maidarbalik was still held hostage and China was threatening to invade. In addition to the powerful force under Hoch Tomor menacing the northern frontier, Mongol nobles of the Uryanghai tribe still held authority in Manchuria. However, Yuan official Liu Yi, administering its south, would defect in 1371. On the opposite side of the empire, Yunnan was still firmly in Yuan hands. The region was governed by Yuan loyalist Basalyarvarmi, the Prince of Liang, descended from Kublai Khan. Finally, modern Sichuan hosted the last rebel faction of the Red Turban Rebellion, the Xia dynasty, known as Ming Xia. Red Turban leader Ming Yuzhen, rather than submitting to Chen Youliang, established his own realm in 1363. Upon his death 3 years later, he was succeeded by his 10-year-old son Ming Sheng under the regency of his mother, Empress Dowager Peng. Hongwu had unsuccessfully asked for the surrender of Ming Xia, which also refused his request of passage of troops to invade Yunnan. It was now time to use more persuasive methods. Ming Xia would be conquered. The campaign began in May 1371, spearheaded by talented General Hu Weiyong for a northern land expedition from Shanxi, and Tang He for an invasion from the Yangtze River. While the latter's advance on the river front was contained at Qutang, General Fu's troops marched on several settlements in northern Sichuan's hills, eventually capturing Mianzhou from Xia forces. Border troops had to be withdrawn from the east to counter the threat, but these reinforcements were not enough. Hu Weiyong took Hanzhou in July. In parallel, reinforcements of Admiral Liao Yongzhong allowed Tang He to break through Qutang. The naval commanders would together reach the capital of Chongqing by the 3rd of August, promptly receiving the surrender of teenage Emperor Ming Sheng and his court. Isolated, Chengdu made a desperate defense against Hu Weiyong until news of the surrender reached the city, which opened its gates. Ming Xia was conquered. The deposed teenage emperor was taken to Nanjing, granted the title of Marquis of Guiyi, and offered a large residence, completing the trio of captured heirs of crushed rivals, alongside Chen Li, son of Chen Youliang, and Maidarbali, son of Ayushridra. But hosting heirs of defeated rivals in the heart of the empire was a double-edged blade. They could potentially amass support and one day launch rebellions against the Ming. To avoid this risk, Hongwu decided to exile Chen Li and Ming Sheng to Korea a few months later. Anecdotally, in September 1371, the emperor met with an alleged merchant from the Byzantine Empire known as Niegulun, likely Nicholas. Hongwu sent him as an envoy to inform the West that he had overthrown the Mongols and reunited China under the Great Ming. It is not known if the envoy ever reached his homeland. In any case, this would be the last formal diplomatic mission between China and the European power for over a century. Four years into the founding of the Ming dynasty, the Hongwu emperor was still determined to subdue the Mongols completely, one way or another. Despite arranging a diplomatic marriage between his second son and Hechtemur's sister in October, the Yuan champion would stay loyal to the Mongol cause until the end. Thus, diplomacy turned to war once more. The Yuan remnants, entrenched in Mongolia, could be crushed once and for all in a decisive campaign. The time came in March 1372, as a three-pronged attack was launched from the Ming border. Leading the Western army, General Fang Shang was tasked with attacking the Yuan in Gansu alongside Hu Weiyong, creating a diversion. Xu Da, at the head of the central army, would attack Hechtemur head-on, leaving from Yanman Pass to march on Karakorum. Li Wenzhong, commanding the eastern army, would march from Zhuyong Pass to invade the Yuan's heartland from another direction. Xu Da's vanguard, commanded by General Lan Yu, ventured deep into Mongolia. The ambitious commander met Hechtemur near the Heryan River, then again next to the Tulj River in April, succeeding in defeating the Mongols. Hechtemur, retreating, would regroup all his forces in Karakorum. Meanwhile, Li Wenzhong, having reached Yingchang, crossed the Gobi Desert to invade Mongolia from the east, capturing vast amounts of livestock from retreating Mongol forces. Xu Da's central army reached Karakorum in June. the northern Yuan would have to resist or be destroyed. He Tamar, in a brilliant maneuver, suddenly counterattacked and against all odds crushed his enemy. Xue Da had no choice but to pull out of Mongolia with immense casualties. Unaware of his colleague's fate, Li Wenzhong, pursuing a Mongol army, had arrived next to the Tuli River. Baited by the retreating force, the emperor's nephew continuously marched deeper into hostile land, reaching the Orkhon River in early July, north of Karakoram. He would fare even worse than Xue Da. The Mongol army suddenly turned around, attacking Li Wenzhong's exhausted troops who had to adopt a defensive stance. The drained Chinese army endured 3 days of harassment before they could disengage. In disarray, the routing army then rushed back to China, but would suffer terrible attrition in the Gobi Desert. When the force finally reached the frontier, it was badly mauled. Paradoxically, the diversion force would be the one to conquer territory. Generals Fang Shang and Fu Youde's Western army was able to capture Ganzhou and several smaller cities. They would chase the Mongols as far as Kharkot, the Black City, known in Chinese as Yijinai. Anecdotally, this once formidable city of the Tangut Western Xia Empire, which would soon be abandoned, was visited by Marco Polo. After this victory in the north, Fu Youde crushed another Mongol force at Dunhuang. Undefeated, the Western army had taken much livestock and many Mongol nobles each time, as well as much of the Gansu region. Nonetheless, the campaign as a whole had been a colossal military disaster. As the northern Yuan had proved they would never yield their ancestral land, Hongwu's ambitions of annexing all the former Yuan dynasty collapsed. As from 1372, the Ming's northern armies would change to a defensive stance as fortifications were raised along that border of the empire. The Hongwu emperor's attention turned back to civilian matters. At the turning point between the Yuan and Ming dynasties, a multitude of faiths and beliefs coexisted within the empire. Hongwu would tighten state control on these. He had recently banned the White Lotus sect and Manichaeism, which sparked minor uprisings that were easily crushed. On the other hand, Confucianism was rather promoted by the emperor, perhaps to gather support from traditional scholars. Throughout the empire, Confucian morals were printed and distributed in cities and villages alike. Altars to Confucius were built, and Confucian rituals implemented. Buddhism fared much differently. Hongwu would significantly tighten state control of Buddhist activities and interfere with the up-to-now autonomous religious hierarchy in monasteries. To avoid the latter from exchanging with secular society, monks were forbidden from renting or selling land, and each monastery was required to appoint a monk to manage its fiscal and financial affairs. More significantly, Hongwu ordered the closure of most small monasteries, forcing their residents to merge with larger institutions in a great amalgamation. By the end of his reign, the political influence of Buddhism would be destroyed. Nonetheless, the emperor also granted tax exemptions to Buddhist temples in the Jiangnan region. Possibly due to the influence of his own former monkhood, he would occasionally sponsor great Buddhist ceremonies, such as to commemorate all victims of his campaigns. Hongwu also tried to maintain ties with Tibet. Like the Yuan rulers, he invited prestigious Tibetan figures, such as the 4th Karmapa Lama, Rinpoche Dorje, who would decline the offer. The monarch nominally renewed the titles that had been granted by the Yuan to its Tibetan vassals, and even created administrations of the Ming Empire in 1372 in the Plateau region. Despite these gestures, the Ming dynasty never truly exercised authority over Tibet. Finally, Hongwu would also put Taoism under state control. Independent Taoist schools were repressed, while the emperor promoted those which collaborated with the state and officiated at court. Besides from the 3 teachings of Confucianism, Buddhism and Taoism, foreign faiths from the West had also gained ground in the empire during the Yuan dynasty. Among these, Hongwu would show significant support for Islam. the emperor commissioned several mosques throughout the empire to be built or restored, including within the capital city of Nanjing itself. More surprisingly, he even personally wrote a 100-character-long poem of praise of Islam and the Prophet Muhammad, known as the 100-word eulogy. The reasons behind this support remain unclear, but it's worth noting that some of his most trusted generals were believed to be Muslims, although this is heavily debated. On the other hand, the fate of Christianity in China would take a starkly different turn. The Yuan dynasty had witnessed the thriving of Nestorian Christian communities, one of its members even becoming the patriarch of the faith. Catholic missions from Europe had also seen strong activity, converting thousands of locals. These would all disappear during the Ming dynasty. The Christian communities slowly drifted away from their beliefs, clinging only to a few rituals out of tradition. It would take nearly 2 centuries before Christianity would once again find a foothold in China. The first generations of imperial examination graduates were seemingly not to the taste of the Ming emperor. Disillusioned, Hongwu abolished the system in 1373, relying once more on personal recommendations for promotions and high-ranking positions. In an effort to ease tensions between the empire and the northern Yuan, which had regained the tactical might of a nomadic warrior society, Hongwu announced his decision to release Maidarbali, heir to the Mongol throne, and send him back to Karakoram. This failed to deter Yuan aggression, as Tamor rode south to raid Datong in November. The interception of a Mongol messenger, however, gave the Ming a great tactical advantage. Xue Da organized a surprise counterattack near Huairao, crushing the Mongol forces in the chaos of a snowstorm that same month. Despite this hostility, Hongwu honored his promise, releasing Maidarbali on the 20th of October 1374, alongside yet another letter demanding submission to the Ming dynasty. The northern Yuan court would never agree. Sporadic skirmishes between the two nations would thereafter continue to occur along the Great Wall. In relief to the Ming, Tamor died in 1375, ending any realistic hope within the Mongols to regain the Yuan dynasty's lost territory. That same year, the Hongwu emperor issued the Da Ming Bao Chao, or Great Ming treasure notes, reintroducing paper money to the Ming dynasty instead of copper coins. These large banknotes, massively printed, were valid across the empire with no expiration date. However, they were not backed by hard currency, and excessive production led to inflation, as during the Yuan dynasty. The treasure notes would suffer significant devaluation within a few years. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Over the years, Hongwu's rule would become increasingly authoritarian and brutal, a turn illustrated by the Weiguan case. Weiguan was a talented official who had once been entrusted to tutor the crown prince Zhou Biao. Rivalries within the imperial court would however cause his demise, as prominent officials accused him of plotting a rebellion. In 1374, Hongwu swiftly ordered the scholar's beheading, which he reportedly later regretted. But the Weiguan case would create other victims. Poet Gao Qi, considered as one of the greatest Ming poets, would suffer a more gruesome fate. Despite his youth, the erudite, renowned for his talent, was recruited for the compilation of the history of the Yuan and served for a time at the imperial court. Gao Qi, uneasy with such a turbulent environment, declined Hongwu's offers of prestigious titles and positions to return to his hometown of Suzhou instead. Soon, the emperor, frustrated and increasingly resentful, interpreted some of the scholar's poems as veiled criticism of his rule. When Gao praised the late Weiguan, the poet was promptly accused of being involved in the alleged conspiracy. Gao Qi was sentenced to the gruesome waist chop, an execution reportedly witnessed by Hongwu himself. The poet's fate was a grim prelude to the mass executions that were to come. Upon the empire's 10th year of existence, a great rebellion shook Guangxi province. Due to severe droughts in past decades, Han Chinese peasants migrated into territory inhabited by ethnic Kam communities, also known as the Dong people. In the process, they gradually seized the land, displacing the locals into nearby mountain valleys. In this explosive context, a period of famine in the summer of 1378 drove the Kam to riot. The outraged locals surrounded the small town of Liping. Rather than fighting, Ming authorities invited the leaders into the settlement for negotiations. However, the Kam envoys were detained, some even dying in unclear circumstances. This would be the tipping point. Wu Weiyong, the enraged son of an envoy, vowed to avenge his father. Rallying the Kam forces, the young figurehead openly rebelled against Ming rule, seizing several small towns including Liping and Jingzhou. His forces were however defeated around November at Tongdao when Ming reinforcements arrived. Wu Weiyong managed to escape and would continue to resist in hiding for 7 years. Around the same time, Hongwu ordered the pacification of western Tibetan regions, which showed signs of unrest. The task was assigned to Mu Ying, a skilled and youthful general whom the emperor had adopted as a foster son in 1353 after he was orphaned during the early years of the Red Turban Rebellion. Mu Ying had already distinguished himself during a smaller expedition to Tibet 2 years earlier. In February 1379, the commander subdued a troublesome Tibetan chieftain and established his headquarters at Taozhou. By October, he had successfully pacified the region, reportedly capturing thousands of Tibetans. In 1380, the brutality of Hongwu's reign reached new heights with a sweeping purge centered around Hu Weiyong. Hu had joined Zhu Yuanzhang in 1355 during the early years of the Red Turban Rebellion and rose through the military ranks before transitioning to a civil role. His career peaked in 1373 when he was appointed Grand Chancellor, leading the Central Secretariat. This institution oversaw the 6 ministries composing the central government. However, like Wei Guan before him, Hu Weiyong fell from grace in 1379 as he was accused by rivals of plotting to overthrow the emperor. Immediately stripped of his positions, Hu was eventually executed on February 12, 1380. But Hongwu's sentence extended far beyond Hu alone. The emperor ordered the execution of all of his accomplices, and possibly even all of Hu's relatives as well. In the subsequent massacre, up to 30,000 people were likely put to death. Following this bloodbath, Hongwu dissolved the Central Secretariat, further centralizing power into his own hands. He would now manage all civil affairs. In early 1380, the Ming dynasty faced a critical challenge as a 10,000-man strong invasion by the northern Yuan was launched from Karakoram. To intercept it, General Mu Ying was sent north. In late March, upon reaching Lingzhou, the general discovered that the Mongol force had already reached the gates of Gansu. Rushing to meet his enemy, Mu Ying reached the enemy camp a week later near Kharkhot and crushed the invading army during a night attack. Determined to neutralize the Mongol menace, Mu Ying did not return yet, but pushed north to march on Karakoram. The Mongol capital, once a thriving city, was reduced to ashes. This would not be enough to subdue the northern Yuan, as its imperial court returned to nomadic life, but Karakoram would never recover and be abandoned thereafter, a century and a half after Genghis Khan had ordered its construction. The early 1380s also marked the conquests of Yunnan. The mountainous region was still firmly in the hands of Yuan loyalists Basajavarmi. Diplomatic attempts to subdue the Mongol holdout had all failed, with envoys being systematically sent back or executed. Thus, it was time to assemble the Ming armies once more. Hongwu organized a great expedition under Fu Weiyong, assisted by generals Ming and Lan Yu. Their 300,000-strong army left Hu Weiyong in September 1381. By late November, Fu Weiyong had arrived in Puding. To create a two-pronged invasion on the Mongols, another force under Guo Ying left from Yongning in December to attack northern Yunnan at Wusa. Echoing in the valleys, Fu Weiyong's troops marched towards the capital of Dongqing. The opposing armies clashed at Qujing in mid-December, where Basalyarvarmi's 100,000-man strong force was crushed, opening the way to the capital. While Fu Weiyong drove a small part of the expedition north to assist Guo Ying, Ming and Lan Yu took command of the rest, advancing on the defenseless Dongqing. On the Mongol side, all hope was lost. Preferring death to surrender, Prince Basalyarvarmi drowned his wife, ordered his ministers to commit suicide, then killed himself on January 6, 1382. Shortly after, the Ming forces occupied the capital, which would be renamed Kunming, its current name. But Yunnan was not fully conquered yet. In Dali, the House of Duan, ruling family in Yunnan before the Mongol conquests, sought to reclaim independence now that the Yuan loyalists had collapsed. But the city could not resist the Ming war machine, and Dali fell in April 1382, concluding the subjugation of Yunnan. During these southwestern conquests, hundreds of captured men and boys were castrated and sent to serve as slaves and servants in important households. Among them were Zheng He, the future great admiral of the Yongle Emperor, who would sail as far as East Africa. Although Yunnan was conquered, it would see many rebellions and uprisings in the future. Ming permanently settled in a mountainous region to oversee the new province. However, it was the whole empire that Hongwu wanted under surveillance. 1382 would also mark the creation of the emperor's most terrifying instrument of state control, the Jinyi Wei, or embroidered uniform guard, an elite force drawn from his imperial bodyguards. Acting as the emperor's secret police, the Jinyi Wei's authority would be unmatched, as they could freely arrest and torture individuals, officially to uncover enemies of the state. Abusing its power, the guard at times arbitrarily arrested people to extract bribes for their release. Although Hongwu could root out political threats, he was not immune to personal tragedy. On September 23rd, Empress Ma, Hongwu's first wife, succumbed to illness. Married to Zhu Yuanzhang in 1352 when he was merely a rebel upstart, Empress Ma had stayed close to him throughout trials and tribulations, and borne him 5 sons and 2 daughters. Her death at only 50 years old shook the empire, and she was laid to rest with great honor at the Xiao Mausoleum on Purple Mountain. The following year, Hongwu sought to instill discipline, which he judged lacking, within both students and staff of the Imperial University, by appointing his nephew, the learned Li Wenzhong, as its head. Li's tenure would be short-lived. With confidence, the official openly criticized his imperial uncle's reliance on palace eunuchs and increasingly harsh rule. Soon, Li Wenzhong met a suspicious end around March 1384. His criticism was, however, relevant. After all, palace eunuchs entrusted with political power had been important factors in the downfall of the Tang and Han dynasties. Perhaps realizing this, Hongwu eventually decided to bar them from political affairs in July. Despite this purge, palace eunuchs would later amass immense power as the dynasty progressed. Li Wenzhong was obviously not the only official discontent with Hongwu's reign. Shortly after the event, a couple of officials publicly criticized the emperor's increasingly severe policies and readiness to impose death sentence, which he surprisingly tolerated. His attention now turned to reforming the military. Overhauling its whole functioning, the monarch introduced the Wei Suo system in 1384. The armies were divided into units or guards known as Wei, each comprising 5,600 men. These units were further subdivided into battalions called Zuo, each consisting of 1,120 men, further segmented into smaller categories. Military positions within this structure were largely hereditary, ensuring a stable and loyal force. Additionally, the Ming armies were designed to be self-sufficient, with troops responsible for producing their own sustenance through military farms, known as Tongtian or Zhuntong. In the same year, Hongwu also turned his attention to the bureaucratic system of the empire. Nearly 10 years after the first attempt, he reinstated the imperial examinations to recruit educated and talented individuals to administrative roles. A notable 472 students passed the metropolitan examination in 1385, swiftly filling vacant positions within the government, thus rejuvenating the imperial administration with fresh talent. Having reorganized the military and administration, the emperor now took to legal reforms, publishing the Ming Da Gao, or Grand Pronouncements, in 1385. This new legal code was marked by its severe and repressive nature, echoing the legalist rule of the Qin dynasty. Through these laws, Hongwu sought to enforce strict discipline across the empire. The text would bring its set of purges and executions, centered around Guo Han, the Vice Minister of Revenue. Accused of embezzling colossal sums of money, Guo Han was swiftly condemned and executed, along with numerous other ministers and high officials implicated in the scandal. In synchrony with these executions, a legendary figure of the Ming met his untimely end, General Xu Da. The commander died at the age of around 52, possibly poisoned by the emperor himself, as Hongwu began to purge potential threats to his throne within the military elite, though natural causes are also possible. In any case, his death would not put an end to Hongwu's campaigns. Although the Yuan dynasty had collapsed, Karakorum lay in ruins, and loyalists in Yunnan had been crushed, there remained another Mongol faction to subdue. In the late 1370s and 1380s, Commander Nagachu rose to the head of the Urianghai Confederation and frequently clashed with Ming forces along the empire's northeastern borders. To tackle this threat, the imperial court began organizing a campaign to subdue Nagachu and the Urianghai in September 1385. However, before the armies could march into Manchuria, unrest in the south of the empire had to be dealt with. In May, Wu Mian, the ethnic Kam leader who had previously led an uprising in 1378 and had been in hiding ever since, resurfaced to launch another rebellion. Overwhelming the unprepared local authorities, he swiftly seized control of Liping, Jinping, and Tongdao. This time, Hongwu responded decisively, dispatching his son, Zhu Zhen, assisted by Tang He, to crush the uprising. After several skirmishes, Wu Mian was eventually betrayed by members of his own army, defeated in August, captured, and brought to Nanjing for public execution. The south was far from pacified. In Yunnan, unrest was brewing on multiple fronts. A full-scale war would even break out between the Ming and the Mongmao, also known as Luchuan, a powerful ethnic Tai state which had agreed to become a Ming vassal after the conquest of the region. Frustrated by the limited recognition granted by the Ming, its leader, Se Longfa, mustered an army of 100,000 men and marched into Ming land, attacking Jingdong in January 1386. General Fang Shang was promptly dispatched to repel the invaders, but his initial expedition ended in failure. Mongmao's campaign emboldened local Yunnan tribal chieftains, who saw an opportunity to rebel against Ming rule and reclaim their independence. In March, the Luo people in Yuezhou rose up, followed by other clans in Dongchuan. Fu Youde was sent to crush the former, and then joined Mu Ying in subduing the rebellion in Dongchuan. Yunnan was eventually pacified, and the war with the Mongmao reached a stalemate. With the south under control, the imperial court redirected its focus to the lingering Mongol threat in Manchuria. In January 1387, General Fang Sheng, accompanied by Lan Yu and Fu Youde, led 200,000 soldiers to confront the Urianhai leader Nagachu. The Mongol commander had established his headquarters at Jinshan, the campaign's target. By early summer, the Ming Expeditionary Force had established 4 fortified outposts beyond the Great Wall, with its centre of operations at Daning, stockpiling supplies for the campaign. As Fang Sheng advanced, one division became isolated, leading to its ambush and destruction on July 7th. Undeterred, the main army crossed the Liao River a few days later, encircling Nagachu's camp. Rather than engaging in a direct battle, the Ming commanders tried a diplomatic approach. They sent Nairao, or Naiziwu, a Mongol commander who had served under Nagachu nearly a decade earlier before his capture by the Ming. Nairao urged his old brother-in-arms to surrender, explaining he would likewise be granted lands and prestigious titles upon joining the Ming Empire. Convinced, and perhaps out of options, Nagachu formally surrendered to General Lan Yu in October and was sent to Nanjing the following month. Southern Manchuria had been subdued. In the Ming capital, Nagachu was rewarded with a comfortable stipend, titles and a luxurious estate, but he would die the following year, likely due to alcoholism. Despite the success of the campaign, General Fang Sheng fell out of favour with the emperor. Whether due to rumoured arrogance, slander by court rivals, or the perception that he posed a potential threat to imperial power, Hongwu stripped Fang Sheng of his military authority and a large portion of his estates, forcing him into retirement in Fangyang. In parallel, esteemed General Tang He, after completing a final mission for the emperor, overseeing the coastal defences of Zhejiang against Wukao pirates, was also granted retirement at his own request and joined Fang Sheng in Fangyang. Tang He would be one of the only top generals to escape the emperor's purge. That being said, Hongwu's military ambitions were far from over, as operations against the northern Yuan resumed. Despite losing Manchuria and any semblance of an organized empire, the Mongols remained a significant threat to the northern frontier. In 1378, their rump state reigns passed from Ayushridra to his brother Togs Tomor, who had resettled westward after the destruction of Karakoram, and was not ready to submit to the Ming. In January 1388, General Lan Yu, leading 150,000 men, was dispatched beyond the Great Wall in a 6th northern expedition against the Mongols. The Ming forces crossed the Gobi Desert in May, reaching Lake Buir, where they encountered their enemy. In a decisive battle echoing Li Wenzhong's feat, the Mongols were crushed, and Lan Yu captured much of the ruler's court, prominent officials, and valuable livestock. Although Togs Tamor and his son and heir managed to escape, they were later ambushed and killed by rival Mongol chieftains during their flight. On September 25th, Lan Yu triumphantly returned to Nanjing. Hongwu praised his victory, but he also criticized the general for taking Mongol princesses as concubines, a move that hindered any possibility of negotiations with the northern Yuan. Back in Yunnan, the war with the Mongmao had resumed. Its leader, Se Longfa, launched a major assault on Morsha in February 1388, but General Mu Ying, entrusted with the protection of Yunnan province, managed to counterattack and eventually repel the invader. Undeterred, Se Longfa returned in April with a massive force of 300,000 men and 100 war elephants, storming Dingbian. In May, Mu Ying engaged Se Longfa in a great battle, ultimately forcing the Mongmao leader to retreat. As had already been the case upon its outbreak, the ongoing conflict inspired new local rebellions against the Ming. In July, Fu Youde initiated a crackdown on the Lolo people in Dongchuan. The campaign initially dragged on, but reinforcements sent by Mu Ying in September secured a decisive victory. However, unrest continued as Huizhou rose up again in October, under a leader named Attila. The rebellion gained momentum, as the insurgents even expanded to Pu'an in January 1389. Fu Weiyong launched a counterattack and successfully captured Atsu in February, pacifying the region. A few months later, Silumfa made peace with the Ming, agreeing to recognize their suzerainty while maintaining his autonomy, thus ending the war with Mongma. Hongwu highly praised his foster son, General Mu Ying, acknowledging him as the backbone of Ming operations in Yunnan. As the 1390s unfolded, marking the final decade of Hongwu's reign, the emperor initiated a new series of brutal purges. In 1390, the infamous Hu Weiyong case, which had already claimed tens of thousands of lives, was reopened. In this re-examination, many more officials were found complicit and executed. Among those condemned was Li Shangchang, who had been the emperor's earliest scholar official, joining him in 1354 during his time as an officer in the Red Turban armies. Li had played a crucial role in Zhu's rise to power and the establishment of the Ming dynasty. Despite his undeniable loyalty and likely personal friendship with the emperor, Hongwu not only sentenced him to death, but also ordered the execution of 70 of his family members. While the emperor was relentless in his purges, fate dealt him a personal blow. On the 17th of May 1392, the Ming dynasty would lose its crown prince. Zhu Biao fell ill and died at 36 years old. Devastated, Hongwu refused to appoint another of his sons as heir. Instead, he decided on primogeniture, selecting Zhu Biao's eldest surviving son, the 14-year-old Zhu Yunwan, to succeed him. This scenario was strikingly similar to the late reign of the Yuan dynasty's founder, Kublai Khan. Around the same time, the emperor sought to further demongolize the Ming dynasty. On September 24th, he enacted a law banning Mongol-style haircuts with harsh penalties, castration for both barber and client, and exile for their families. This decree forced all males to adopt the traditional Han hairstyle, reinforcing Ming identity. As previous purges had shown, no one was immune to imperial power. In 1393, it was General Lan Yu who would be put to the sword. Alongside other prominent commanders, Lan Yu had been removed from army command and reassigned as military staff for the new heir apparent, a position that reportedly frustrated him. Soon, the Jinyi Wei, the emperor's secret police, commanded by Jiang Huan, accused Lan Yu of plotting a rebellion. A search of his residence reportedly revealed a cache of 10,000 Japanese swords, likely Itachi. With the accusation unjustifiable, Lan Yu was promptly executed alongside thousands of alleged accomplices. Later that year, the 10 most senior princes of the blood were summoned to Nanjing, where Hongwu presented them with a historical compilation detailing instances where princes had rebelled against imperial power, bringing the country to ruin. Evidently, this was a stern warning against harboring any ambitions of their own. In 1394, Hongwu also had the works of Mencius revised, stripping them of any mention of the right to rebel. These passages were subsequently banned from the imperial examinations, ensuring such ideas would not be taught or propagated within the future elite. At the turn of the year, Hongwu purged 3 additional great generals. On December 20th, 1394, General Fu Weiyong was sentenced to death, either forced to commit suicide or executed. Shortly after, another prominent general, Wang Bi, faced the same fate. General Fang Shang would follow in turn. Setting the legal precedent for the rest of the dynasty, the Da Ming Lu, or Great Ming Code, was published in 1397, establishing itself as the empire's principal body of law. It would soon be put to the test. That summer, Hongwu erupted in fury against a high-ranking scholar presiding over the imperial examination, since not a single candidate from the empire's north had passed the metropolitan test. Despite a re-examination that upheld the results, Hongwu enforced the passing of 61 northern candidates, exiled the presiding scholar, and dismembered several others accused of falsification. During this period, many more people were executed for minor offences. 12 years after Wu Mian's rebellion, the Han people would rise up once more. After the first rebellion, the Ming had confiscated vast amounts of their land. Time had now come for retaliation. This new revolt was led by Lin Kuan, who initiated the uprising in April 1397 in Jinping. The Han forces initially enjoyed some success, but as large Ming reinforcements arrived, the rebels were driven into guerrilla warfare in the region's forested hills. The campaign was brutal, as Ming soldiers ruthlessly massacred non-cooperating villages. Eventually, by October, Lin Kuan was captured and executed, bringing the rebellion to a close. Hongwu would witness one final campaign in Yunnan province. Once again, it revolved around the mighty Mongma. Its leader, Se Longfa, had become unpopular in his court for embracing foreign technology and beliefs, namely gunpowder and Buddhism. This led to a conservative faction revolt led by Dao Ganmeng, forcing Se Longfa to seek refuge in Ming territory in December. As a vassal to the empire, he was invited to Nanjing, where he pleaded with the emperor to be restored to power during an audience. Hongwu granted the request, and the Ming soon dispatched an expedition to Yongchang, ultimately defeating Dao Ganmeng and restoring Se Longfa to power in early 1398. The Ming dynasty was pacified, perhaps just in time as the Hongwu emperor had fallen ill in December 1397. As his condition deteriorated, he wrote to his fourth son, Zhu Di, the Prince of Yan, who had become his eldest surviving son with the death of Zhu Gong in March 1398. Hongwu ordered Zhu Di to assume the defense of the northern borders of the empire, declaring, "For repelling foreign threats and keeping the interior safe, who is there but you?" These words would soon take on a particularly ironic twist. On June 24th, Hongwu died at the age of 69. The emperor was buried in the Xia Mausoleum on Purple Mountain, alongside 38 of his concubines entombed alive, a practice revived by the emperor despite its virtual ban in the 3rd century BC. To prevent any disruption to his succession, Hongwu had ordered all princes to remain in their fiefs rather than to attend his funeral, ensuring a smooth transition for his grandson Zhu Yunwen. And so, at the age of 20, Zhu Yunwen ascended the throne as the Ming's second emperor, under the name of Jianwen. Initially, thanks to Hongwu's consolidation of power, his imperial authority would be absolute. Eunuchs were kept away from political positions, prominent officials were kept under check, and the dynasty's most powerful generals had all been purged. Zhuo Yuanzhang's biography is one of the most fascinating in the annals of China. From an illiterate, orphaned peasant to an emperor who unified China. From a benevolent ruler to a harsh autocrat. The Hongwu emperor undoubtedly shaped the course of history, overthrowing a dynasty to establish his own and reunite the country. Little did anyone realize that his meticulous plans for a seamless succession would collapse in only 4 years. The Jianwen emperor would not reign long. Thank you for watching my video, I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or requests, feel free to leave them in the comment section below.